The Georgia rain never quite let up that spring, drenching everything in a stubborn silver wash. On the edge of one sleepy suburb, in a yellowed single-story house with battered shutters and azalea bushes drooping in the drizzle, Helen Parker stood at her kitchen window, clutching a chipped mug of coffee. The clock on the microwave flashed 5:11 a.m., insistent as if it knew she'd been awake all night. Helen, 62, wore the years of worry in her eyes and the gentle patience of a retired nurse in her hands. It was habit now to watch the dawn arrive. Not because she loved the morning, but because quiet made the old aches in her bones louder. She missed Mark most when the world was still. Her husband had been a police officer, her other half, gone these 6 years. It was the job, they said. An accident. She'd buried him with his badge, and, after, tried to bury her questions with him. The sudden motion at the fence jolted Helen from her thoughts. There, beside the gate, stood a dog. Not just any dog. A hulking, rain-dappled German shepherd, fur mottled with scars, standing as if carved from granite. He watched the house, not moving, yellow eyes unreadable and haunted in the pale morning light. Helen's breath caught. A memory, sharp and strange, rose up. Mark's old partner, Sean Whitaker, used to bring his K9 by for visits. A shepherd named Rook. He'd vanished after that terrible raid, the one that left Mark dead and Sean missing. 5 years ago, maybe more. No one ever found the dog, or Sean. But this dog, this ghost at her gate, looked so much like Rook it hurt. Helen set her mug down with trembling fingers. The rain grew louder as she stepped outside, clutching a shawl around her shoulders, squinting through the drizzle. The dog did not flinch. He simply watched her, a silent sentinel. A shiver passed through Helen that wasn't from the cold. "Hey there, boy," she called softly, her voice a cracked whisper. "You lost?" The shepherd's ears flicked, but he did not move forward. Helen took a tentative step, heart pounding. He looked rough. A thick scar cut across his snout, and his right ear was notched, as if from a fight long ago. She remembered Sean's stories of Rook, brave, stubborn, gentle with kids, but nobody's fool. Helen retreated slowly to the kitchen. She ladled warm chicken stew, her own recipe, full of pepper and thick dumplings, into a battered metal bowl. Mark used to tease her about feeding strays, but she'd never stopped. She set the bowl on the stoop, then stepped back inside, closing the door, but leaving the porch light on. The dog waited until Helen's silhouette disappeared. Only then did he creep forward, nose quivering. He devoured the stew in steady, controlled bites, not desperate, but deliberate. Rain dripped from his coat as he finished. Then, to Helen's surprise, he did not leave. He curled up by the gate, just beneath the old iron sign Mark had welded there years ago. Parker. His head rested on his paws, eyes fixed on the dark street. Inside, Helen hovered by the window, breath fogging the glass. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The world felt thin, the air charged with secrets. She could not sleep. All night, she checked again and again. The dog remained, unmoving, a silent shadow guarding the fence. Near dawn, lightning flickered, just for a moment, illuminating the dog's eyes, reflecting a world of stories Helen had never been allowed to hear. She thought of Sean, of the raid, of the secrets buried with Mark. Something about this animal, this patience, was not just loyalty. It was grief made flesh. Helen left a second bowl of food on the porch. This time, as she stepped outside, her heart thudded in her chest. The dog raised his head but didn't approach. She tried to ignore the way his gaze seemed to pierce her. Searching, pleading, remembering. A car rolled by, splashing through puddles. The dog tensed, muscles taut, then relaxed as the vehicle passed. Helen caught herself whispering, "It's okay. Nobody's here to hurt you." She wondered if she was reassuring herself or the dog. In the hours before daylight, the wind picked up, rattling the mailbox. Helen wrapped herself in a faded police academy hoodie and dozed in the living room, the rain her only lullaby. She dreamed of Mark's laughter, of coffee on the porch, of Rook's eager bark. She woke with a start, unsure if she'd truly heard something outside, or if her mind was playing tricks. When morning finally arrived, gray and stubborn, the dog was gone. The bowls were empty, stacked neatly by the door as if placed by unseen hands. Helen's heart sank. Had it all been a trick of memory? Had grief finally made her see ghosts? She stepped outside, feeling foolish, then stopped cold. There, by the gate, something glinted in the wet grass. Helen's fingers closed around a battered police badge, sticky with drying blood. The name was still legible. S. Whitaker. Her knees went weak. She nearly dropped the badge, chest tightening, mind racing with impossible questions. A soft whimper pulled her gaze down. Wrapped in a torn scrap of police uniform, beneath the badge, was a puppy. Trembling, wide-eyed, no older than a few months. Its collar was red, the tag dented but legible. Scout. Helen knelt, rain soaking her jeans, tears stinging her eyes. The puppy licked her hand, its tiny body pressed against the uniform as if seeking shelter in memory. The German shepherd, the scarred ghost, stood just beyond the gate, watching. He had returned. Helen scooped up the puppy and cradled it against her heart, badge pressed between her palms. She looked into the eyes of the dog, outside the fence, her voice a trembling promise. I remember you, Rook, and I'm not going to let you down. Thunder rolled across the sky as the rain began anew. Rook did not leave the gate. Something had returned to Helen Parker's world, a secret, a promise, a silent warrior waiting in the dawn. And for the first time in years, Helen was ready to listen. The humid Georgia morning wrapped Helen Parker's porch in a ghostly fog, blurring the world to a memory. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but everything, wood, air, even Helen's skin, felt swollen with secrets. She sat in her rocking chair, cradling the puppy, Scout, wrapped in the piece of battered uniform, her hands trembling around the blood-stained badge marked S. Whitaker. The weight of it felt heavier than iron. Rook, the scarred German shepherd, stood vigil at the foot of the steps, his fur still damp from the rain, his eyes never leaving Helen. Every so often, the dog's nose twitched, as if reading something in the air she couldn't sense. Helen pressed her forehead to the cold metal of the badge. What happened to you, Sean? She whispered. She remembered the years when the Whitakers came over for Sunday dinner, the laughter, the stories, and how Rook would rest his head in Mark's lap, brown eyes so full of wisdom it almost seemed human. A sharp bark startled Helen from her reverie. Rook pawed urgently at the porch rail. When Helen glanced over, she noticed something odd tied around the dog's right foreleg, a crude, knotted cord holding a small, waterproof pouch. Helen approached slowly, palm out, her heart hammering. It's okay, boy. Let me see. Rook stood still as a statue, allowing Helen to untie the pouch. Inside, she found a USB drive, scratched and muddy but intact. Her hands shook as she brought it inside. She hesitated at the old laptop on Mark's desk, suddenly afraid. What if this was some cruel trick? Or worse, what if it confirmed everything she'd always feared about the night Mark died and Sean disappeared? Taking a deep breath, Helen inserted the USB. The screen flickered, and a single video file appeared. If you're seeing this, she clicked play. The screen filled with the gaunt, battered face of Sean Whitaker. His eyes, once so quick to laughter, were rimmed red, his cheeks split and bruised. He sat in a dim, unfamiliar room. Behind him, Rook paced, nervous, and Helen could hear gunfire in the distance, a siren wailing like some wounded animal. Sean's voice cracked. If you're seeing this, I didn't run. They buried us. Mark tried to do what was right. We found out about the drop, about the cash, and they turned on us. His eyes flicked away as if watching shadows move. I don't have much time. Rook got out, but they're coming back. Helen, if you see this, don't trust anyone from the precinct. Not even. The video glitched, static slicing the sound. When the image returned, Sean looked defeated. If I don't make it, please take care of Rook. And if you find the badge, it means he found you. He's smarter than any of us knew. The screen went black. Helen's tears came hot and fast, blurring the screen. She clutched the badge, the video echoing in her mind. Sean was family too, she sobbed, the sound ragged in the quiet house. Scout whimpered and licked her cheek, the tiny pup's warmth grounding her in the present. Helen rocked them both, whispering, "I won't let them bury you, Sean. I promise." The fog outside pressed close to the windows. Rook sat at the door, silent, waiting. His eyes seemed to say, "It's not over." Helen knew she couldn't do this alone. She fumbled for her phone, hands slippery with tears. There was only one person she trusted, Detective Carla James. Carla had been Mark's academy friend, the godmother to their son before cancer took him, and the last person at Mark's funeral to look Helen in the eye. Helen dialed. The line rang 4 times before Carla answered, her voice groggy but alert. "Helen, everything all right?" "No, Carla. I need you to come. Now." Helen's voice cracked, the old nurse's calm gone. "It's about Mark and Sean and Rook. He's here." A stunned silence. Then, "I'll be there in 10. Helen hung up, heart racing, mind tumbling through images. Mark's badge, Sean's haunted face, the raid that stole everything from her. She looked at Scout. The puppy wagged its tail, then, with childlike trust, curled into Helen's lap, his collar tag clinking against the uniform scrap. "Scout," she murmured, stroking his silky ears. "Did you know my Mark? Did you see what happened out there?" Rook, still at the door, made a low, rumbling sound. Not a growl, more a warning. Helen shivered, drawing the puppy close. It was only minutes before Carla's car headlights cut through the mist. The detective strode up the walk, her expression stormy, lips set in a tight line. Even out of uniform, Carla radiated the old confidence of a woman who'd seen the worst and refused to flinch. Helen let her in, barely able to speak as she thrust the badge and USB at Carla. "He came back," Helen whispered. "He brought Sean's badge in this message. There's more. I know it." Carla watched the video in grim silence. Her knuckles whitened on the edge of the desk. When it ended, she swore under her breath. "Helen, I always had doubts about the raid, about what really happened to Mark, to Sean. But this," she wiped at her eyes, the tough cop momentarily shattered. "He said not to trust anyone. That's almost everyone left on the force." A gust rattled the porch door. Rook's head shot up, and for a second Helen saw the soldier and the animal, every muscle ready, every sense straining for danger. Why would Rook come back now? Carla wondered aloud. "He vanished 5 years ago." Helen nodded. "If I'd known this dog was still alive, I'd never have stopped asking questions." Scout, feeling the tension, whimpered again. Helen scooped him up, and he instantly curled into her lap. The small dog's soft body was a fragile, precious thing. Hope, fear, and innocence all bound together. Carla crouched by Rook, her voice gentle. "Hey, old friend. You saved Mark once, remember? Think you can do it again?" Rook pressed his head into Carla's hand, eyes shining. In the corner, Scout yawned, then licked Helen's hand. Outside, the fog thickened, wrapping the house in a hush. Carla pulled out a battered folder from her tote, a stack of old photos, some yellowed with age. There was Rook as a puppy, all oversized paws and floppy ears, sandwiched between Sean, Mark, and another officer, Dunley. Dunley, Helen remembered, was the one who vanished after testifying about corruption. She shuddered. "Too many ghosts," Helen murmured. "Too many secrets." Carla nodded, eyes fierce. But Rook didn't forget. And neither will we. Thunder rumbled again, low and distant, as if warning them the past was coming. And this time, Helen Parker wouldn't let it stay buried. Just before sunrise, Helen sat in the quiet, Scout's tiny heartbeat fluttering against her palm, Rook guarding the door, and Carla, at last, beside her. For the first time since Mark's death, hope flickered. Tomorrow, they would search Sean's last known location, the coordinates he'd left in the video, somewhere deep in the tangled woods known as Deep Hollow. Helen didn't know what they would find, but she knew Rook hadn't brought them this far just to turn back. Outside, the German shepherd watched the world, waiting. Helen whispered a promise to the dawn. "We're coming, Sean. We're coming." Underscore, 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 underscore. Night fell hard and quick over the Parker home, the fog, outside, thickening, until it pressed against the windows like a living thing. Helen sat with Scout curled up in her lap, the puppy's breathing warm and steady, a soft counterpoint to the storm of thoughts that battered her heart. Rook rested in the corner of the living room, back straight, always alert, his shadow a silent anchor on the worn carpet. The badge, Sean's badge, rested on the coffee table, its blood-stained gleam catching the lamplight with every small movement. Detective Carla James paced the length of the room, her boots clicking quietly on the hardwood. The old photos she'd brought, snapshots of another life, were scattered on the table and couch. One showed Rook as a puppy, tongue lolling, sitting between Sean, Mark, and Officer Dunley. They looked invincible in their blue uniforms, arms slung around each other's shoulders, eyes full of that wide-open hope that made them believe justice would always win. Helen's breath hitched every time she looked at Mark's smile in those pictures. It was so alive, so unbroken by the shadows that came later. Carla stopped in front of the window, staring into the fog. "I can't stop thinking about that video," she murmured. "Sean looked hunted. And if he sent Rook back to you, he must have known you'd never give up." Helen swallowed, running her fingers through Scout's fur. "If I'd known this dog was still alive, I'd never have stopped asking questions. I let myself believe what they told me. About the raid, about Mark, about Sean running off. I was so tired, Carla." Carla sat beside her, taking Helen's hand in both of hers, squeezing it gently. "You never gave up. You survived. That takes more than stubbornness, Helen. That takes courage." A long silence passed. Rook's ears flicked as a car rumbled past outside, but he didn't move. The puppy squirmed and pressed closer to Helen's side, as if understanding that he was now part of the tangled web of memory that haunted this house. Carla reached for the photos. "Do you remember this day?" she asked, holding up one where the 4 officers stood beside an old K9 cruiser, the sun burning behind them. Mark was so proud of Rook passing his tracking exam. I was there. Sean let Rook ride up front. Dunley said that dog was smarter than half the department. Her lips twisted into a sad smile. "He was right." Helen stared at the photo, her chest tightening. "Dunley. He's the one nobody talks about. He disappeared after the investigation, after he testified about the drug drop in Deep Hollow. I tried to reach his wife once. The house was empty. Nobody knows where they went." Carla's eyes darkened. Because someone wanted them gone. Mark, Sean, Dunley, they all saw something they shouldn't have. Someone inside the force made sure the truth died with them. But not with you, and not with Rook. A gust of wind rattled the window panes. Rook stood, crossed the room, and pressed his head gently against Helen's knee, eyes imploring. She reached down and stroked his fur, feeling the old scars beneath her fingers. "What did you see, boy?" she whispered. "What did you survive out there, all alone?" Scout whimpered softly. Helen gathered him closer. She wondered what horrors this tiny creature had witnessed in his short life, what it meant to be left at her gate, shivering beneath Sean's badge. Carla stood, energy sparking in her voice. "I want to look at the files again. All of them. I've still got copies of the original raid reports, and the witness lists. Something about those names always bothered me." She rifled through her tote, pulling out a battered manila folder. As she opened it, Helen could see the neat columns of names, times, notes in official police shorthand. Carla scanned the page, then paused, her finger hovering over a line. "Look at this. Dunley's last call-in from the woods was logged at 3:24 a.m. Mark's, 30 minutes later. But the official report says the raid began at 3:40. Her eyes flashed. That means Mark and Dunley were both in Deep Hollow before the official start time. Why? Helen frowned, turning the information over in her mind. Because someone tipped them off early? Or they found something and called for backup. Only, instead of help, someone came to silence them. Rook whined, moving to stand between the two women, head tilted as if listening for the truth buried beneath years of silence. Carla's hands shook as she flipped through more photos. Here, Rook as a pup, Sean grinning like an idiot, Mark with his hand on Dunley's shoulder. They trusted each other. They wouldn't have made a move unless they believed they were doing the right thing. She pressed her palm against the photo, knuckles white. God, Helen. What did we let happen? Helen's vision blurred with tears, but she blinked them away. We didn't let anything happen. They were betrayed. And now we have Rook. We have Scout. We have Sean's badge and that message. Her voice hardened, growing stronger with every word. We won't let them be forgotten. The clock ticked on, every minute dragging more ghosts into the room. Helen stood, lifting Scout in her arms, crossing to where Rook waited by the door. Come on, boy. Let's get you some food. You earned it. In the kitchen, she ladled out more stew, smiling as Rook ate with his usual careful patience. She poured a bowl of kibble for Scout, who attacked it with the wild hunger of a survivor. Back in the living room, Carla packed away the photos, her jaw set. Tomorrow, we go to Deep Hollow. Sean left us the coordinates. I'll bring my service piece, just in case. You stay behind me, Helen. We don't know what we're walking into. Helen nodded, a strange peace settling over her. We're not alone. Not with Rook. She watched the big shepherd finish his meal and curl up beside Scout, his body a wall between the world and their fragile hope. The night deepened. Helen sat by the window, watching the rain, her reflection blurred by the glass. In her lap, Scout slept, breathing softly. Rook, never quite resting, blinked in the darkness, always listening, always remembering. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old sign, Parker, above the gate. Helen thought of Mark, Sean, Dunley, of the promises made and broken, of all the things left unsaid. She whispered into the night, a vow more powerful than prayer. Tomorrow, we walk into the woods, and we do not walk alone. The past was heavy, but as Helen looked at the sleeping puppy, at the scarred dog who refused to give up, at Carla bent over her files with stubborn determination, she knew. Memory could be a weight, but it could also be a weapon, and she was ready to fight. The morning arrived, draped in a heavy mist that clung to everything it touched, tree branches, mailbox, even the edges of Helen's resolve. She stood in the hallway, lacing up old hiking boots with hands that shook just enough to betray her nerves. Carla appeared at the door, in faded jeans, her service weapon tucked beneath a windbreaker, face drawn with determination. Scout watched them both with anxious curiosity, his little tail swishing in tentative circles. Rook paced between door and window, every sense on edge, as if he could already smell the secrets buried in Deep Hollow's tangled heart. Helen opened the front door and shivered. The air was sharp and wet, and the silence felt unnatural, a hush that seemed to warn against what they were about to do. But she was done listening to warnings. Mark, Sean, Dunley. She owed them more than fear. Carla slipped a hand onto Helen's shoulder. We stick together, no matter what. Her voice was low, but certain. Helen nodded. Let's bring them home. The drive to Deep Hollow was mercifully short, just 12 miles along winding back roads. As the car bounced over potholes, Helen's mind replayed Sean's message. If you're seeing this, I didn't run. They buried us. She glanced at the back seat, where Scout napped against a faded jacket, and at Rook, who watched the world blur past the window, muscles taut, every hair standing in anticipation. They parked beneath the shadow of old oaks, roots buckling the asphalt like knuckles under a tablecloth. Mist curled between the trunks, swallowing the sun and reducing the world to shades of gray and green. A flock of crows burst from the canopy as they stepped out, the beating of their wings sharp as gunfire. Carla checked her pistol, then slung a battered backpack over one shoulder. Stay close, Helen. Rook, lead the way. Rook didn't hesitate. His nose low to the ground, he followed an invisible path, deeper into the trees, paused silent on thick carpets of moss and last autumn's leaves. Helen and Carla followed, the weight of the forest pressing in from all sides. Scout trotted between them, alert and eager, but sticking close, his tiny collar glinting in the gloom. The deeper they went, the stranger the woods became. Sunlight barely filtered through the dense canopy, and the air grew cool and close. The only sounds were their breath, the soft snap of twigs beneath their boots, and the occasional distant rustle. Animal or memory, Helen couldn't tell. Suddenly, Rook stopped, body rigid. He sniffed the ground, circled twice, and began to dig. The women exchanged a look and hurried forward, kneeling beside the dog. The earth was loose, still damp from rain, and Rook's powerful paws quickly unearthed a small, rusted police badge. Carla brushed the dirt away, squinting at the faded letters. A. Dunley. Helen's heart twisted. She remembered Dunley's laugh, the way he called Mark brother, even when they argued. "They left him here," Carla whispered, fingers trembling as she traced the badge's battered edge. Helen felt the world tilt. She gripped a nearby tree for support, fighting the vertigo of grief and guilt. "We should have come sooner. We should have never stopped searching." Carla placed a hand on Helen's back. "They wanted us to forget, but Rook didn't." Scout whimpered and nosed the ground, drawing Carla's attention. Beneath Dunley's badge, hidden in the earth, was a charred scrap of paper. A journal entry, its edges burned, but the message still visible. 3 names, 1 truth. They knew. Helen's skin prickled. 3 names, Mark, Sean, Dunley. That's the truth someone's been trying to bury all along. Carla pocketed the badge and journal scrap. This is evidence, real evidence. Someone will want it to disappear. A sudden crack echoed through the woods, a branch or something heavier. The women froze. Rook spun, placing himself between them in the direction of the sound, lips pulled back, silent but menacing. Scout pressed against Helen's leg, shivering. Carla drew her gun, voice a whisper. "We're not alone." Helen's breath came shallow and quick. The trees pressed in. The silence suddenly loaded, as if every shadow was watching. From the undergrowth, a figure moved. A flash of dark jacket, the glint of metal at a belt. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. Carla motioned Helen back. Eyes narrowed. "We have to get out, now." They retraced their steps, Rook guiding the way. Every muscle tense. Helen's heart pounded so loudly she was sure whoever was watching would hear it. Each step felt heavier, as if the forest itself wanted to keep its secrets hidden. When they finally burst from the trees and into the weak morning light, Helen nearly sobbed with relief. Carla scanned the tree line, gun still drawn, but there was nothing, just the wind and the endless whisper of leaves. They hurried into the car, doors locking with sharp clicks. Carla started the engine and sped away, dust and leaves swirling in their wake. Helen looked back, half expecting to see the shadowy watcher step from the woods, but there was only Rook's reflection in the rear view, eyes burning with 1,000 unspoken truths. The drive home was silent, but for Scout's soft whimpers and the sound of Helen's racing heart. Carla gripped the wheel, face carved from stone. "We found him, Helen. We found Dunley. But someone else knows we did." Helen nodded, cradling the badge and the burned journal entry. "We're not safe, are we?" "No, but we're not powerless, either." Carla's jaw set with new resolve. "We're going to finish this. For them." Back at the house, Helen carried Scout inside, setting him gently in his basket. Rook paced the length of the living room, restless, as if sensing the danger that followed them from the woods. Helen pulled the curtains tight and checked the locks twice, the comfort of home now tinged with fear. Carla sat at the kitchen table, spreading out the badge and burned journal entry next to Sean's badge and the USB drive. The evidence was mounting, but so was the risk. "Tomorrow, I'm going to the precinct," Carla said, voice hushed. "There's more in the archives, redacted files, witness statements. If we can connect all of this..." Helen nodded, voice trembling but determined. "Whatever it takes." Outside, the day faded, shadows lengthening. Rook settled by the door, eyes never leaving the street. Helen watched him, heart full of gratitude and dread. He had led them to the truth and into someone's crosshairs. For the first time in years, Helen prayed, not for safety, but for courage. For Mark, for Sean, for Dunley, and for herself and the dog who remembered. As night crept in, Helen whispered into the darkness, "We're not alone. Not anymore. And we won't be silent." In the stillness, Rook raised his head, as if he understood. Somewhere in the woods, the watcher waited. But inside the house, a different kind of waiting had begun. The kind that turns memory into action, fear into resolve. Tomorrow, they would fight back. Tonight, they remembered. Dusk stretched long shadows over Helen's front porch as she sat, eyes fixed on the street, the weight of the morning's discoveries pressing down on her like a stone. The day had been one endless loop of reliving the horror in the woods, her hands still trembling whenever she brushed the edge of Officer Dunley's rusted badge or glanced at the charred scrap of his journal. Scout napped in a sunbeam near the window, his small form peaceful, but Rook never left the front door, every muscle tensed, eyes locked on the street, as if waiting for an enemy to appear. The neighborhood was usually a quiet stretch of Georgia suburbia, mailboxes, lawns, a basketball hoop rusting at the curb. But Helen couldn't shake the feeling that something in the atmosphere had shifted. There was an unfamiliar car idling at the end of the block, black, government issue, windows tinted too dark to see inside. Helen's chest tightened. Her mind flickered to the stranger in the woods. Had they followed them home? Was this the same danger? Closer now? Rook paced the porch, head low, hackles up. He didn't bark, but the air around him buzzed with silent warning. Helen reached for her phone, hands shaking as she texted Carla. Unmarked car out front. Something's wrong. Come soon. Before she could press send, the car's engine died. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. Tall, neat, plainclothes, moving with the careful confidence of someone used to being obeyed. His face was unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses, his suit crisp and impersonal. He walked to Helen's gate and paused, glancing at the Parker sign with faint disinterest before turning his gaze to Helen and the dog. "Mrs. Parker?" His voice was pleasant, practiced. "I'm Agent Mercer. May I have a word?" Helen gripped the railing, forcing her voice steady. "You can say whatever you need from there." Mercer nodded. "I'm here on behalf of a federal agency regarding certain outstanding property, a canine specifically. German Shepherd, answers to Rook." He nodded at the dog. "He's federal property, tied to a classified investigation. I'll need to take custody of him, effective immediately." Rook positioned himself between Helen and Mercer, unmoving. There was no growling, only the cold, unblinking stare of a creature who'd spent years learning who to trust. Helen's pulse thudded in her ears. "You're not taking him anywhere," she said, voice thin but fierce. "He's here with me." "You have no right." Mercer's lips twitched, almost a smile. "I assure you, Mrs. Parker, I have every right. This dog is material evidence in an ongoing federal case. There are matters here beyond your understanding." His tone was smooth, oily. "You're not safe, you know. There are people who would do anything to keep the past buried. Let us handle this." Helen's voice broke. "If you're here to bury another truth, you'll have to go through me." She felt the words come from somewhere deep and old, the part of her that never stopped fighting even when the world tried to break her. Mercer studied her for a long moment. "I know what happened to your husband, Mrs. Parker. I know what happened to Sean Whitaker. To Dunley." His voice dropped, the information chilling. "You think you're the first widow to chase after justice? It never ends well." The mention of Dunley made Helen's skin crawl. That detail, never public, never on the news. She glanced at Rook, saw the dog's body tighten even more, as if sensing the conversation's true stakes. Scout whimpered in the background, and Mercer's eyes flicked toward the house. "You have other responsibilities now, Mrs. Parker," he said softly. "Children, animals." Sometimes it's best to let sleeping dogs lie. Helen stepped forward, fire in her eyes. Sometimes it's best to tell the truth and let people decide for themselves. I'm not afraid of you, Agent Mercer. Mercer shrugged. Maybe you should be. He reached into his coat, and for a tense second Helen's breath caught. But it was only a business card. No badge, no federal seal. He tossed it on the porch step. If you change your mind, you know how to reach me. Rook never moved, never blinked. Mercer hesitated, sizing up the dog. Then, with a cold smile, he turned and walked back to his car, pausing at the gate. Be careful who you trust, Mrs. Parker. The deeper you go, the darker it gets. Helen waited until the car disappeared around the corner, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out the evening's crickets. She knelt and hugged Rook, her hands buried in his thick fur. Good boy. You're not going anywhere. Not if I have anything to say about it. The sun slipped behind the trees, and the porch fell into shadow. Helen picked up the business card, blank except for a number. The card felt heavy, the way certain pieces of evidence do, loaded with consequences. She tucked it in her pocket and went inside. Scout ran to greet her, tail wagging, nose pressed to her shin. She scooped him up, letting his warmth calm her shaking hands. Rook entered behind her, pacing every window and door before settling in front of the couch, a living shield. Carla arrived moments later, face pale and drawn. She listened to Helen's account in silence, then nodded grimly. He knew about Dunley? That's not possible unless he's got access to internal affairs files. Or worse. Helen pressed a hand to her forehead. He warned me to let it go. Threatened me. Scout, too. Carla's eyes flashed. We're too close. They want us scared. But if Mercer knew Dunley's name, he knows everything we found out in the woods. We need to move fast. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Helen set Scout on the couch beside Rook. She glanced at the front door, now doubly locked, and shivered. He said the dog's evidence. Material evidence. But Rook isn't just evidence, Carla. He's a witness. He remembers. Carla squeezed her hand. We're not backing down now. If Mercer or anyone else comes back, they'll have to get through me too. Helen felt strength surge through her. Grief, rage, love, hope, all tangled into something unbreakable. For Mark, for Sean, for Dunley, and for Rook. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping out a steady rhythm against the windows. Helen watched the storm gather and whispered to herself, You can't bury the truth forever. That night, as thunder echoed over the house, Rook kept watch by the front door, calm, unyielding. Helen finally slept, the badge clutched in her palm, knowing that what they'd started could never be silenced now, no matter who tried to shut them up. And out there, in the darkness, Agent Mercer waited. But so did Helen, Carla, Scout, and Rook, ready, at last, to face whatever would come next. Lightning flickered outside the window as Detective Carla James hunched over her desk in the quiet corner of her precinct. It was well past midnight, but fatigue was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when the weight of 2 decades of secrets pressed in on her like the humidity before a summer storm. The archives room, hidden behind the main evidence cage, smelled of old paper, spilled coffee, and the faint trace of cleaning fluid, but to Carla, it might as well have been a cathedral. Every report, every redacted page, every file box could be the final piece to the puzzle she'd been chasing for years. She glanced over her shoulder, listening for footsteps in the empty hallway, then slid her badge across the old brass scanner. The lock clicked. Inside, the air was thick and still. Her phone buzzed once with a message from Helen. We're safe. Rook is with us. Scout's asleep. Carla smiled just for a second. The knowledge that Helen and the dogs were safe gave her a sliver of comfort. But she knew that wouldn't last. Not with Agent Mercer prowling the periphery, hunting for the same truths she and Helen had started to unravel. She found the burned box on a top shelf, labeled Deep Hollow 7A. Dust caked the lid. When she opened it, her throat tightened. The first file was an incident report with Mark Parker's name. The second, Sean Whitaker. She sifted through, noting the altered timestamps, the pages with thick black lines obliterating whole paragraphs, and the odd, repeated signatures in shaky handwriting. Every official fact seemed to have a shadow beneath it, every timeline a jagged hole where the truth had been cut out. Carla traced her finger along the margin of one report, recognizing Mark's neat cursive, "Ask Dunley about the drop zone." She stared at the phrase, heart pounding. Someone had left it in, or missed it entirely. As she worked, the overhead lights flickered. For a moment, Carla's shadow stretched long and uncertain over the folders. She swallowed hard, reminding herself she was not the kind of cop who looked away. Not anymore. A sudden scuffling broke the silence. Just outside the door, Carla's hand moved to her sidearm, pulse racing, but when she cracked the door, it was only Rook, his big frame blocking the entrance, Scout prancing anxiously beside him. Helen, wearing her old raincoat, followed close behind, out of breath from climbing the stairs. Carla exhaled. "You scared me half to death. You know that?" Helen managed a tired smile. "We couldn't sleep. Scout kept whining at the door, and Rook, well, you know how he is when he wants to be somewhere." Carla let them in, closing the door behind her. "Good thing, too. I just found something." She pointed at the burned file box. "Look at this." She handed Helen the page with Mark's note. He knew about the drop zone. That's where everything started going wrong. Helen's eyes filled with tears as she traced her late husband's handwriting. "He tried to warn you all." "He tried," Carla nodded. "In Dunley, his logs stopped the day before the raid. There's a gap. It's like someone wiped everything about that night from the system." Scout nosed the side of the box, then sniffed vigorously at one corner. Rook pawed the wall, nose twitching, then whined low and urgent. Helen bent down, running her fingers along the wall paneling. "Wait," she murmured. "This isn't flush. Carla, help me." Together, they pried the panel loose, revealing a shallow cavity lined with dust and the lingering scent of old dogs and cigarettes. Inside, buried beneath a stained notebook, was Rook's original K9 harness, still bearing his faded name tag. Sewn into the lining was a battered, ancient thumb drive, almost invisible. Carla's hands shook as she retrieved it. Helen smiled, tears bright on her cheeks. "You remembered, didn't you, Rook? You brought us here for this." Carla plugged the drive into her laptop, heart in her throat. The device whirred, old and stubborn. Then, finally, a directory of encrypted files appeared. Carla's eyes widened, timestamps stretching back over 5 years marked with names, dates, locations. Some were short videos, others voice memos and scans of handwritten logs. Scout barked once, startling them all. Helen picked him up, pressing his little head to her chest. "Easy, boy. We're getting closer." Carla opened the first file. The grainy footage showed Rook, just a pup, training alongside Sean and Mark. They laughed, their voices overlapping in a blur of youthful energy. But the later files were darker, bodycam footage of late-night meetings, whispered conversations in cars, Mark's voice tense. "We know about the drop. It's not just drugs. There's money, names, protection. We have to tell someone." The sound of a gun cocking, a sudden cut to black. Helen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. They were set up. Carla watched, face pale and rigid. "These are chain of custody records. Rook was trained to carry evidence, to recognize voices, to remember locations by scent. That's why they couldn't find him. He wasn't just surviving, he was hiding, carrying proof." Helen knelt beside Rook, hugging his thick neck. "You never gave up. You protected Mark's secret all these years. You're more than a witness. You're a survivor." Carla checked the timestamps, noticing one labeled, "Final Transmission." The file played, a shaky, desperate video of Sean whispering into his phone. Rook pressed close by his side. "If you get this, it means I didn't make it. Rook knows what to do. He'll come home when it's safe. Protect Helen. Trust no one." The screen flashed, then cut to static. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the laptop and the distant rumble of thunder outside. Carla finally straightened, gathering the evidence into a separate folder. "We have what we need to bring this to light." We have the files, the journal, the badges. And we have Rook? Helen nodded, her voice stronger. We finish this? For Mark, Sean, Dunley, and every officer who thought loyalty meant silence. Scout curled up beside Rook, yawning. Helen stroked the puppy's back, whispering, You're safe now. All of us are, as long as we stick together. Carla packed up the evidence, locking it in her bag. Tomorrow, I'll go to Internal Affairs. I'll leak the first files to the press if I have to. They can't cover it up anymore. Helen smiled, pride and grief warring on her face. You're brave, Carla. Mark would be proud. I know I am. Outside, the storm finally broke, rain thrumming against the glass. Rook stood, alert but calm, eyes shining with a memory that was more than pain. A memory of loyalty, and the promise that nothing, not even betrayal, could erase the truth. Helen looked at her unlikely family and felt something shift, a hope, fragile but growing, that after all these years, the truth might finally see the light. The early morning mist hung over Deep Hollow like a shroud as Helen, Carla, Rook, and Scout returned to the woods, this time with a plan and the weight of newfound evidence. Carla's SUV crunched along the narrow service road, headlights cutting through the fog. No one spoke much on the drive. Helen sat with Scout curled in her lap, her other hand resting on a folder packed tight with USB drives, badges, and burned scraps of testimony. Rook, big and solemn, watched the woods roll by with the quiet intensity of a soldier heading into battle. Carla slowed the SUV as they approached the collapsed cabin at the end of the trail. The building sagged against the earth, half buried by pine needles. Its roof caved in from a hurricane long ago. It was a place where secrets could hide, and memory seemed to linger in the air. We're sure this is it? Helen whispered, voice barely above the hush of the woods. Carla nodded, scanning the area. According to the files and the GPS logs on Sean's drive, this was the drop zone and the last place Dunley's phone pinged. We need to find anything that might have survived the fire. Rook leaped out first, nose low, body tense. Helen and Carla followed, flashlights sweeping through the charred beams and tangled undergrowth. Scout padded behind, ears twitching, tail lowered. Inside, the air was cold and thick with the scent of rot and old smoke. Carla shined her light over a scorched corner. Here. Looks like something was buried under the floorboards. She and Helen pried at the planks, nails scraping, until Rook joined in, his strong paws making quick work of the soft earth. After a few tense minutes, they uncovered a small metal box, half melted, marked, Evidence, Whitaker. Carla's heart raced as she broke it open. Inside were several USB drives, a handful of photos, and a battered SD card, all tagged and dated from the night of the raid. Helen swallowed hard, recognizing the handwriting on some of the evidence bags. Mark's, Sean's. We have to get these out, Helen said, her voice shaking with hope and fear. This is proof. They can't ignore us now. Carla nodded. I'll download everything to the cloud from my laptop, just in case. They set up on a flat patch of ground just outside the cabin, Carla's laptop balancing on a fallen log. She worked quickly, copying files, glancing up at every snapping branch and bird call. The forest pressed in, heavy and silent except for the distant caw of crows. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the trees. Not a twig. Gunfire. Carla's head snapped up. Down! She shouted, grabbing Helen and shoving her behind the log. Scout yelped, darting behind Rook, who immediately positioned himself between the women in the cabin, his body low and ready. Another shot rang out, this time closer, spitting bark from the log inches from Helen's head. Carla drew her service weapon, heart pounding. Call 911, she hissed to Helen, who fumbled for her phone, hands shaking. This is Detective Carla James, badge 501. Officer under fire, Deep Hollow Trail, collapsed cabin, need backup now. Rook, eyes burning with focus, lunged toward Helen just as another shot whistled through the air. Helen cried out as Rook's body collided with hers, knocking her flat. The bullet grazed Rook's rear leg, leaving a deep scratch of blood in his thick fur. He didn't whimper, just planted himself over Helen, refusing to budge. Carla returned fire, aiming at the shadow moving through the trees. Her voice was a razor's edge. "Show yourself! Police!" There was a pause, then a voice, rough with age and fear. "Drop your weapon, James. This ain't your fight anymore." Helen's heart lurched. She recognized the man stepping into the clearing, Officer Lowell. Retired years ago, but she remembered his face from Mark's old photos, always in the background, always lurking. Carla stood, gun raised, voice steady. "Lowell, you worked the raid?" Lowell's hands trembled as he aimed a battered revolver. "You should have let it die, James. You should have listened to Mercer. Nobody wants this coming out. Nobody." "You were paid to keep it quiet, weren't you?" Carla's words were a blade. Lowell's eyes were haunted. It was supposed to be simple, just scare him, send a message. But your friend, your husband, he wouldn't back down. Neither would Sean or Dunley. A distant siren echoed through the woods. Lowell's gaze darted toward the sound. He took a shaky step back, lowering the gun for a split second. Carla seized the chance, tackling him to the ground. The revolver flew from Lowell's grip, and Rook, wounded but determined, rushed to pin the older man's legs, teeth bared in silent threat. Lowell froze, face pressed into the moss, breathing ragged. Police backup arrived moments later, blue lights flashing through the trees. Carla handed Lowell off to the responding officers, her voice taut. "He fired on us. He's tied to the raid. Get internal affairs here, now." Helen cradled Rook in her arms, sobbing with relief and terror. His leg was bleeding, but he licked her hand and pressed close, refusing to let go. "Not again. Not another hero gone?" she whispered over and over, rocking the big shepherd as if he were a child. Scout curled up beside them, tail wagging weakly, offering his own comfort. An EMT team bandaged Rook's leg while Carla helped Helen to her feet. "He's going to be okay," Carla promised, voice hoarse. "He saved your life. Again." Helen nodded, tears streaming down her face, badge clutched so tightly it left a mark in her palm. "We have the evidence, Carla. They can't stop us now." Carla watched the crime scene techs collect the evidence box, the photos, and drives. "We're turning everything over to internal affairs. No more secrets, no more lies." As the forest emptied of sirens and strangers, Helen knelt and kissed Rook's scarred head. "You're a good boy. You always have been. You brought us the truth." Rook rested his head on her knee, eyes closing, Scout snuggled close against his flank. For the first time in a long time, Helen felt something like hope blossom in her chest. Fierce, fragile, but undeniable. The pines whispered overhead, bearing silent witness to the end of a long, dark night. Justice, at last, was stirring, and Helen knew she'd never have to face the darkness alone again. By the next morning, the sleepy suburb of Parker's Crossing no longer felt like a forgotten corner of Georgia. Blue and white police tapes snaked through Deep Hollow. News vans crowded the edges of the pines, antennas thrust skyward. Helen watched from her living room window, hands wrapped around a mug of cooling tea, the anxiety in her chest pulsing like a second heartbeat. The events of the past day replayed in her mind. Gunfire in the woods, Lowell's haunted confession, Rook's body shielding her from harm. Rook lay on the rug by the couch, a fresh bandage on his rear leg. Scout curled protectively against his side. Carla had spent the night at Helen's, answering internal affairs questions, providing statements, and making sure Helen and the dogs stayed safe. The house buzzed with new energy, phone calls, voices, the smell of fresh coffee. Yet, under it all, there was a hush, a collective holding of breath, as if everyone in the room knew they were standing on the edge of something much bigger than themselves. Carla emerged from the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, sir. I understand, but the media already has the footage. We can't contain it." "No, sir. I'm not retracting my statement." Her tone was steely, unwavering. She hung up and met Helen's eyes. "It's out. National news. The whole country knows now." Helen's hands trembled. "Does it say what they did?" Carla nodded, her expression both triumphant and haunted. "Every detail, the raid, the cover-up, Dunley, Sean, Mark, even the role Rook played. Internal Affairs took the footage straight from the evidence box and released it at a press conference this morning. They had no choice, not with Lowell in custody and everything backed up to the cloud. Helen set her mug down, suddenly afraid she might drop it. She crossed to the couch, dropping to her knees to hug Rook, who licked her cheek and pressed his good paw against her chest. "You did it, boy. You brought it all back." The house phone rang, a rare sound these days. Helen picked up, listening to a voice introduce itself as a national reporter. She hung up after a few seconds, too overwhelmed to speak, and let the answering machine collect message after message. Other reporters, old friends, even strangers offering support and gratitude. The world, it seemed, had finally noticed the battle she and Carla had been fighting for years. A few hours later, a procession of unmarked cars and local police vehicles arrived. Internal Affairs officers, fresh, sharp, faces new to Helen, entered with respectful nods, collecting the last of the physical evidence, the badges, the journal scraps, even Rook's harness, and the drive stitched into its lining. A forensics team dusted each item carefully, cataloging every piece as if it were holy. Carla stood with them, answering questions, signing statements. "You're not taking the dogs," she told one officer who eyed Rook's K9 tag. "He's more than evidence. He's the last living witness." The media descended outside, flashes popping as soon as Helen, Carla, and the dogs emerged for a statement. Helen didn't want the cameras, but she remembered what Mark used to say. Justice can't survive in the dark. She stood behind Carla, letting her speak. Rook at her side, Scout pressed against her shin. Carla faced the crowd, her voice ringing clear. For 5 years, the truth about the Deep Hollow raid was buried, along with brave officers who tried to do what was right. This conspiracy was bigger than any one person, and it cost good people everything. But this time, justice didn't come from a courtroom. It came from loyalty, memory, and courage. This dog, Rook, wasn't just evidence. He was the last surviving witness. And thanks to him, Mark Parker, Sean Whitaker, and Alan Dunley finally have their story told. The crowd erupted in questions, but Carla just reached down, letting Rook rest his battered head against her hand. The cameras flashed, immortalizing the image. 2 officers, one old, one young, and a German shepherd who had become a symbol for all those failed by the very system they served. Later, at the precinct, Helen and Carla watched as Internal Affairs agents arrested 2 former detectives, both names that appeared in the old raid files. They saw the news break live. Breaking, police raid, cover-up linked to drug trafficking ring, officers charged. Interviews with survivors played on every channel. Helen watched her own words, shaky and raw, repeating on the screen. They tried to erase the story, but Rook remembered. He carried grief, truth, and hope, in silence. The precinct was transformed, no longer a place of whispered doubt, but a hive of activity and vindication. Carla fielded calls from Internal Affairs, the Attorney General, even the mayor. Helen watched her friend with pride and a deep ache for all they'd lost. By late afternoon, the department held a press conference on the station steps. Rook, stitched up and bandaged, limped to Carla's side. Cameras flashed again and again, capturing the sight. The hero dog, the brave detective, and Helen, quiet but unbowed, with Scout wagging his tail at her feet. A reporter stepped forward. "Detective James, what's next for Rook?" Carla smiled for the first time in days. "He's going home, where he belongs. And from today, he'll never be just a number in a file again. He's family. And he's proof that no matter how much they try to silence us, memory and loyalty are stronger than any lie." The crowd applauded. Helen blinked away tears, lifting Scout so he could see over the podium. The puppy yipped, earning a laugh from the gathered press, breaking the tension. After the conference, as the evening sun slanted across the parking lot, Helen knelt beside Rook. "We did it," she whispered, burying her face in his thick fur. "You saved us all, old friend." Scout licked Rook's muzzle, curling up close. Helen looked at Carla, her voice thick with emotion. "Mark would be proud. Sean, too." And Dunley. You brought them all home. Carla nodded, jaw tight. And you, Helen, you never gave up. Not once. As the sky faded to deep gold and the news vans rolled away, Helen finally let herself breathe. The story was out. The guilty were being brought to justice, and in the middle of it all stood a battered, loyal dog, his tail thumping, his eyes shining, not with pain or fear, but with the enduring light of hope. For the first time in years, Helen believed that justice could be more than an idea. It could be real, if only enough people were brave enough to listen. 1 year later, the world felt like a gentler place, though the shadows of the past still lingered, softer now, worn at the edges by justice, memory, and time. The Georgia air was warm with spring, the sky impossibly blue above the newly dedicated Fallen Officers Memorial Garden, built where sunlight filtered through tall oaks and wild azaleas bloomed against the stone. Helen stood at the edge of a crowd gathered beneath the flag, her hands folded around a bouquet of fresh-cut lilies and baby's breath. She wore Mark's old academy pin on her jacket. Scout, now a sturdy adolescent, sat at her feet, red collar gleaming, and at her side, looking regal despite his graying muzzle and the slight limp in his rear leg, was Rook. The dog wore an honorary police badge clipped to his harness, a symbol of service and sacrifice that meant more than any medal. Children from the local K-9 youth program stood in a row, their crisp blue vests matching the colors of the flag that waved overhead. News crews watched from the edges, their cameras muted, the moment too sacred for intrusion. Carla stood at the podium, her presence no longer weighed down by secrets, but buoyed by the responsibility of her new role, head of the Internal Watchdog Task Force. Helen looked around, seeing so many faces, old friends, families of the fallen, officers from every corner of the state, and a few strangers who had simply come to say thank you. She closed her eyes, remembering a time when she had thought herself utterly alone. The ceremony began quietly, with music and prayers, then a roll call for the names lost in Deep Hollow: Mark Parker, Sean Whitaker, Alan Dunley. As each name echoed across the garden, Helen felt a rush of pride and sorrow. When Carla spoke, her words rose above the hum of bees and birdsong. They tried to erase the story, but he remembered. He carried grief, truth, and hope. In silence, Carla said, nodding toward Rook, "Loyalty isn't noise. It's endurance. Justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it wears fur and waits for someone brave enough to listen." The crowd erupted in soft applause. Helen caught sight of Rook's ears pricking at the sound, as if he, too, understood the weight of honor and the strangeness of human ritual. When Helen's turn came, she stepped to the podium, nerves fluttering in her stomach. She looked out at the crowd, children fidgeting, officers standing at attention, Mark's old partners with their hats pressed to their chests. Some say dogs can't remember, that what makes them special is how quickly they forgive, how easily they love. But I've learned something different, something I think Rook and Scout could teach us all. Memory is a burden and a blessing. It gives us pain, yes, but it also gives us the courage to fight for what's right and to hope, even when everything seems lost. She paused, voice catching. They tried to bury what happened. They tried to make us forget. But Rook remembered. He carried the truth through the woods, through years of silence, and brought it to my door. Not because he couldn't move on, but because justice deserved to be heard, even if the world wasn't ready. I am proud to have known Mark, Sean, Dunley, and proud to call Rook and Scout my family. Helen stepped back, the applause this time strong, ringing across the lawn. She felt Rook press against her leg and Scout nuzzle her hand, grounding her in the present. The garden ceremony ended with a final gesture. The children from the K-9 youth program, carrying white doves in wicker baskets, lined up before the new granite memorial. Each dove bore a blue ribbon with the initials of one of the fallen. At Carla's signal, the children released the birds into the sky. The doves soared, their wings brilliant in the sunlight, circling once above the crowd before vanishing into the open blue. A hush fell. Helen knelt by Rook, pressing her forehead to his. "Thank you," she whispered, and he licked her cheek in return. As the crowd began to disperse, Helen wandered among the new memorial stones. She found the one for Mark, Sean, and Dunley, a single marker carved with their names in a line beneath. Truth endures in the hearts of the loyal. Carla joined her, the two women standing together in a silence thick with gratitude and memory. "It's strange, isn't it?" Carla said at last. "How much one animal can change the course of so many lives." Helen smiled, eyes shimmering. He was more than a dog. He was a guardian, a bridge between what was lost and what still needed to be found. Rook wandered a few steps ahead, letting a group of children pet his head, his badge gleaming in the sun. Scout bounced around him, full of energy, barking at passing butterflies. Helen's gaze softened. "You know, there were days I wished I could forget it all. The pain, the loss. But if I had, we never would have found the truth. We wouldn't have found each other." Carla nodded. "Justice doesn't always look the way we want it to. But today, it's enough. Today, we remember, and we move forward." Helen took Carla's hand. Together, they watched as the K-9 youth group circled Rook and Scout, laughter and questions spilling from them. Did Rook really find all the evidence? Was Scout scared? Can I train a dog like him? The answers came in stories, sometimes somber, sometimes joyful, but always honest. As the sun lowered, Helen reflected on the meaning of memory, of loss, and of survival. Memory, she thought, was like a path. Sometimes tangled, sometimes nearly lost beneath the weeds, but always there if you had the courage to follow it. For her, for Rook, for all those who'd suffered and endured, memory was not an anchor, but a legacy in motion. She watched as Carla, Rook, and Scout posed for photos by the memorial, surrounded by new friends and old allies. For a moment the world was quiet, the burdens of grief and injustice eased by the soft joy of remembrance and hope. Helen whispered to herself, "We survived. We told the truth, and now we honor it, in every step, every story, every breath." As the garden emptied and the first stars appeared above the oaks, Helen led Rook and Scout home. The journey had been long, the losses heavy, but what remained was unbreakable, a promise that justice, once remembered, could never be fully silenced. And in the gentle hush of the evening, as Rook lay at her feet and Scout chased fireflies in the grass, Helen understood that the greatest meaning of memory was not just to hold on to the past, but to build a better future for those who come after. A gentle rain tapped at the windows of Helen Parker's home, but inside, laughter and soft voices wove a warmth the weather couldn't touch. It had been nearly 2 years since Rook appeared at her gate, and the house itself seemed transformed by his presence and by the ripples of justice he set in motion. The old living room, once a quiet and haunted place, now buzzed with the cheerful chaos of community. Children's voices, the occasional bark, and the comforting clink of mugs as neighbors gathered for another session at the Rook House. The Rook House, as it was now known, had become more than a home. It was a sanctuary, a place for healing, for learning, and for honoring the bond between humans and dogs. Helen still lived there, of course, her life intertwined with the building's new purpose, but her solitude had been replaced by the presence of others, veterans with haunted eyes and shy smiles, children needing reassurance, and volunteers drawn by the story of the dog who wouldn't let the truth be buried. Rook, gray now, around his muzzle, and moving a little slower, but still with a certain regal dignity, often lay by the fireplace, his favorite spot. The warmth there soothed his old joints, and the flicker of flames cast his badge into glimmering highlights. He seemed content, eyes half closed, as children read him stories or rested their hands on his broad back. There was always someone coming by to say hello, to offer a treat, or to sit beside him in quiet company, drawn by the peace he radiated. Scout had grown too, a lean, eager dog with boundless energy and a heart for helping. The puppy, who once shivered in a uniform scrap, now wore a red vest, the word therapy stitched proudly across his side. Under Helen's and Carla's gentle guidance, Scout had been trained to comfort anxious children, visit hospital wards, and even help local veterans through moments of panic or loneliness. He'd inherited Rook's empathy and added his own brand of playfulness, winning over every visitor with a wag and a nuzzle. One afternoon, Helen sat in her rocking chair, watching a small group of children gathered for the weekly K9 story time. Scout trotted from child to child, pausing for pats and giggles. Rook dozed in his favorite corner, his chest rising and falling with slow, even breaths. The room glowed with lamplight, and the old Parker badge, now framed with a photo of Mark, Sean, Dunley, and Rook as a pup, hung over the mantelpiece, a silent testament to the journey they'd all survived. A little girl with golden curls knelt beside Rook, tracing the lines of his graying fur with reverent fingers. "You're like a memory I can pet," she said softly, eyes shining with wonder. Helen smiled from across the room, her heart full. The children didn't know every detail of what had happened, but they knew Rook was special, that he had brought people together, that he had made their world safer by simply refusing to forget. After the session, Helen lingered by the fireplace, her mind drifting between past and present. She could hear Mark's laughter in the next room, see Sean's lopsided grin, remember Dunley's booming voice. The ghosts no longer frightened her. Instead, they felt like old friends, watching over the house and all who entered. Carla arrived just before dusk, her hair dusted with rain, a folder tucked under her arm. She was busier these days. Heading up the internal watchdog task force had turned her into a reluctant celebrity. But she always made time for Rook House. She dropped to her knees, greeting Rook and Scout in turn, then turned to Helen. "We got approval for a grant, enough to add a second therapy wing and start the outreach program for veterans," she said, unable to hide her pride. "You started something bigger than you know, Helen." Helen gripped her friend's hand, tears prickling. "We started it together, and it was Rook who showed us the way." They sat by the fire as night deepened, sharing stories old and new. Visitors drifted in and out, a boy who once refused to speak now reading aloud to Scout, a young woman stroking Rook's fur as she talked through her fears. Sometimes the house was full of laughter. Other times it echoed with the quiet resolve of people reclaiming their lives. As the evening wound down, Helen pulled a blanket over Rook, who rumbled contentedly and nuzzled Scout as the younger dog curled against him. Helen looked around at the photographs, the handprints on the wall, the letters from grateful families. She whispered to Rook, "You didn't just remember the past. You made sure we had a future. You turned this house into hope." Rook opened his eyes, his gaze deep and knowing. For a moment, Helen felt the years fall away. She was again a young wife beside Mark, a nurse caring for broken souls, a woman chasing justice when everyone said it was impossible. She understood now that love and loyalty could outlast even the most relentless pain. The next morning, a group of veterans gathered in the common room, their hands resting on Rook's back or gripping Scout's paw as they shared stories of loss and survival. Helen brewed coffee, listening to the voices, hesitant at first, then opening, growing stronger. The house hummed with life, and Helen felt a peace she hadn't known in decades. A small ceremony was held that afternoon, dedicating the new therapy wing. Carla spoke first, her voice steady, eyes shining with unshed tears. "When you take in a lost dog, you might be opening your door to a witness, a warrior, or a guardian." Rook was all three, and he left behind more than a story. He left a path. Helen stepped forward last, Scout beside her, Rook dozing near the podium. She looked out over the crowd, neighbors, friends, children, veterans, and a few faces from the police force who had seen the power of truth firsthand. She spoke softly. "Memory is a gift, and so is love. Rook taught us that you don't have to bark to be brave, and that sometimes listening is the most powerful thing you can do. If you open your heart, if you refuse to forget the quiet ones, you might change more lives than you ever imagined." The applause was quiet but sincere. Helen returned to her chair, Scout leaping onto her lap, Rook sighing deeply as he napped. As the sun set, the house filled with the golden light of late afternoon, Helen looked around and smiled, her soul light. When you take in a lost dog, you might be opening your door to a witness, a warrior, or a guardian. Rook was all three, and he left behind more than a story. He left a path. So if this story moved you, share it. Speak up for the quiet. Trust those who listen more than they bark. And honor what memory loyalty, and love can do, especially when wrapped in fur. Underscore, 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 underscore,